So let's see. So we're going to be talking here. So there is going on here. There's a big shofar. A big shofar. Yitaka b'shofar gadol. A great shofar will be sounded. So what is the idea of this great shofar? And so in this mimer, we're going to be talking about different levels of shofar. There's the shofar that we blow, that we're going to blow in shul on a couple weeks from Thursday and Friday. But then there's a higher level of shofar that was blown in the Beit HaMikdash. Why am I saying it's a higher level of shofar? Because that shofar is blown even when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos. So even when Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, we blow the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash. So in the Beis HaMikdash is a higher level of shofar. Okay. And then beyond that, there's the level of a shofar that's called shofar gadol, a great shofar. And it's so great we don't even know who's blowing it, because it's like we've brought many times, when something is in the passive form or in the third person, we don't know who, or it's here it's in the passive, yitaka b'shofar gadol, that a great shofar will be sounded, because it's coming from such a great level of the divine that it's beyond any name whatsoever. That goes beyond all of this. And we're going to see today that there's another level of shofar, and that's the level of shofar of...
You're cutting out.
Cutting out.
You're being cut out.
Am I cutting out for everybody?
Now it's better.
Okay. It's not much I can do about it. I'm sitting in my chair. The internet is intermittent.
Rabbi, are you going to be sharing the screen?
Yes, I will be. But right now I'm just giving a preface. So today we're also going to be going into the shofar of Matan Torah. Okay. Now, what is the idea of a shofar? The idea of the shofar is reaching a deeper level of relationship. And let me in order for us to understand this adequately, let me explain this just a bit. Ultimately, what God desires is to have a relationship with the human being, right? With us, with the Jewish person down here in this world, with all of our flaws and frailties. Okay. But for Hashem, who is beyond any limitation to relate, so Hashem created what I'll call it a system, a structure, a format. And part of that format, of course, is the Torah and the rules that we have to keep. And to be deserving of the relationship, because it should be, in order for it to be a meaningful relationship, there needs to, we need to do something. So we have this whole layer of, shall we say, expectation. And when we're not conforming with that expectation, or in other words, we're sinning, right? We're falling short of that, then we're on a lower level. But then there's a way, and when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, what we're meant to do is to blow the shofar, which is about bringing out an inner level of connection, a more visceral level of connection. And what we're going to see is that level goes deeper and deeper. And there is, according to Kabbalah, we have a level called Keser. Keser is the crown. The idea of the crown is that the crown goes beyond the system. The crown goes beyond the system. Just like you have, the crown that goes on the head. It's beyond the human being, beyond the person. Conceptually, the idea of the Keser is that which is beyond the system. And by beyond the system, what it means is is that it's that which connects us with that which is higher than us, or that which is even higher than the system. And in Kesser itself, there's going to be two levels. There's what's called, because anytime you have a connector between two things, it has to have a component of both. So let's say David speaks Greek and Ben Sion speaks Hebrew, and they can't communicate with each other. So you need a connector, you need a translator. That translator has got to speak at least a little Greek and a little Hebrew in order to be the connector between them. And so this is the idea Kabbalistically of the world of Kesser. It is connecting the infinite with the finite, or that which is beyond the system with the system. So it has to have part of Kesser, what's called the innermost of Kesser, called the level of Atik, it's normally called. That is its true beyondness. But the external component of Kesser is called Arich, and that is the level at which it can now relate to that which is outside of it. Okay. But then we're going to see that there are levels that go beyond that. And in our discussion, it's going to be then there's the level of the very essence of Hashem itself, which is beyond any system whatsoever. Okay, so with this preface, let's jump into the mimer. The whole mimer, of course, it's all about calling out the inner relationship with Hashem. So when we said the shofar gadol with regard to the great shofar, it says it will be sounded without a name. There are other verses the Rebbe brought where God will blow a shofar, Hashem Elokim b'shofar yitkaf. But here it says that a great shofar will be sounded without stating who will sound it, because this shofar blast will draw down and reveal the divine light which is entirely hidden in nature, because it's so spiritual, so high, which cannot be expressed by any of the names for Hashem. And we all know that when it comes to a relationship, you can have a relationship so deep that you can't find any words, and there's no name, there's nothing to name it. And that's the level of relationship of the shofar gadol, the great shofar. So I think we may have started section 2, but let's continue with that. So now to further clarify, so we're trying to understand the difference between the regular shofar and the shofar gadol, this great shofar, right? That we speak about in our davening, right? We say in our prayers, we say Tekah b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, that we ask God to blow the great shofar for our liberation, right? For the coming of Mashiach. But that's a great shofar. So the Tzemach Tzedek elaborates on this in a mimer entitled V'haya Bayom Hahu, on the concept stated in the mimer L'Kutei Torah. That mimer explains that the shofar is sounded on Rosh Hashanah to arouse God's pleasure in creation of the world. Okay, so this is another deep idea brought forth in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that on Rosh Hashanah, that God, in order to bring about existence, God had a tainug. In Hebrew, they call it a tanug. In Yiddish, we call it a tainug. Same word. And oneg. Oneg is a delight. God had a delight. And that delight was, he doesn't talk about what that delight, the delight is ultimately really the relationship that God is going to have with us. Is delightful. It's brought the idea of a Jew having free choice and having obstacles and things getting in his way, but yet he says, I'm gonna go and sign into the class and listen to the class to study Torah. I'm gonna go and do the mitzvah. I'm gonna give charity, and I don't have much, but I'm gonna give, right? A person going beyond all of the things getting in their way in order to do Hashem's will. This is so beautiful. Hashem has great nachas from this. God has great delight. And in order to experience that delight, what did God have to do? He had to create a world in which he had to create a stage. And the stage is this universe. And so every Rosh Hashanah, what the shofar is doing is it's calling out God's pleasure, the pleasure that God has in creating the universe. Really, it's not, I don't know that the pleasure is in the creation of the universe. It's not like an artist who has pleasure in creating something. That's not what we're talking about. But God has pleasure in what's going to come forth from this creation, namely the special relationship. So the Jew is going to She'amarti v'naseh ritzoni, in the language of our sages, that I spoke, I asked you to do something and you did it, even though it wasn't easy because I put a lot of obstacles in there and made it very unobvious and counterintuitive for you to do, but you did it anyway, right? Hashem has great nachas from that, and this is the tainug that we're calling out through the blowing of the shofar, okay? And what we're going to discover now is that there's many levels of tainug, many levels of pleasure, one deeper than the next, as we're soon going to see. So the shofar is sounded in Rosh Hashanah to arouse God's pleasure in the creation of the world. The manifestation of the quality of pleasure is inherent on Shabbos. Therefore, when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, the sounding of the shofar is not necessary. Okay, that's, in other words, on Shabbat, that tainug that we're talking about, that we're bringing about that tainug, we're blowing the shofar to reveal and arouse that level of delight in the creation. Well, that tainug is already there on Shabbat. Shabbat is the day of oneg, of divine delight, and it's already there. So by way of analogy, why do you knock on the door? Because you knock on the door because it's closed and you want to come in to have permission to walk in. But what if you're already in the room? Would you knock on the door if you're already inside? No, that would be ridiculous. So the sages instituted that when Rosh Hashanah occurs on Shabbat, we don't blow the shofar because you already have the tainug. The whole purpose is to reveal this delight. That delight is, you're already there. No point in blowing the shofar. It is superfluous, as we say in Hebrew. Okay. I want to just go back a step before we go on with this. You know why we don't blow a shofar on Shabbat?
Because it's walk.
No. So blowing a shofar, the rabbi
I'd have to carry through somebody might want to find out like how to blow it, and carry it through a rishus harabim to the person who was going to ask.
To the Rav, right? So here's the thing. The rabbis discuss this. They say blowing a shofar is not malacha. It's not considered malacha on Shabbat. Certainly not according to the Torah law. It's not considered malacha. So why is it? It was a rabbinic prohibition. The rabbis prohibited blowing the shofar because of Shmerel the Nudnik. The Gemara doesn't mention Shmerel the Nudnik. I'm just mentioning his name to make it a little bit more dramatic. So what Shmerel the Nudnik, he's got to blow the shofar, but he has his shofar and he says, oh, there's a crack in it. There's some problem, I'm not sure. I have to go to the rabbi and ask him if the shofar is kosher. Or I'm not sure how to blow a certain sound. I've got to get more information from the Rav, from the rabbi, and he's going to carry it outside where there's no eruv, He's going to carry it to the rabbi and thus violate Shabbat. And because of that, the rabbi said, better that we don't blow the shofar. And in Chassidic philosophy, it's kind of like, okay, this is like such an important mitzvah. And because of Shmerel the Nutnik, we cancel the mitzvah, that no Jewish person is going to hear the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, because this guy, maybe he's going to go and, all right, well, you know what? Here's the thing. Oftentimes, the rabbis will make a decree. There's other underlying purposes, other underlying reasons that are not revealed. And they will give maybe a reason that is dvarim shel mabekach, things that are seemingly not so significant. Okay? Because underlying it, there's something much more significant. And Chassidus reveals to us that which is much more significant. What is that? What we just said. That on Shabbat, the whole purpose of blowing the shofar is to reveal a certain level. What level? The ta'anug, the delight. That delight is already present on Shabbat. So there's no point in blowing the shofar. However, the Mishnah continues and tells us that in the Beit HaMikdash, they blew the shofar. In Beit HaMikdash, they blew the shofar. Well, 1 second. Why would the same reason not apply? I'm saying the spiritual reason. The whole point is that on Shabbat, we have this high-level revelation of ta'anug, of delight. So why blow the shofar? So Chassidut explains, because there's a deeper level of delight that they were able to reveal in the Beit HaMikdash only. So the Beit HaMikdash was able to reveal this much greater level of spiritual divine delight. And because of that, even on Shabbat, they would blow the shofar, because there's a deeper level of delight. Let's go and see it inside. So they would, however, sound the shofar in the Beis Hamikdash, even when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, because there are several levels within the quality of pleasure that is drawn down through the sounding of the shofar. Or we should say the level that's manifest in in the Beit HaMikdash surpasses the quality of pleasure that is inherently manifest on Shabbos. So when they blew the shofar in the Beit HaMikdash, there was a level of pleasure that surpassed the level of Shabbat, and therefore it was not superfluous. And in the Beit HaMikdash, they would continue to blow the shofar. And now he's going to go into the spiritual levels that I just alluded to at the beginning of the class. The quality of pleasure that is inherently manifest on Shabbos stems from the external dimension of Keser. So we spoke before, Keser is that which connects our level to the level of the infinite. It's a connector. Keser is a connector. So, and as a connector, it has two levels. There's the external dimension of Keser that relates to us more, and then there's the internal dimension, which is a deeper level. So when we blow the shofar on a regular Thursday, as we'll do this year, we are accessing this unbelievable level of Keser, but it is the external dimension of Keser, the source of entities which emanate from God. And so it's the source of everything that comes afterwards. The quality of pleasure that is drawn down by the sounding of the shofar, by contrast, by blowing the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash, that relates to the inner dimension of Keser, the lowest dimension of the source of all emanation. I'm not going to go into the explanation of that last line, but basically, there is emanator. That is the source. That's Hashem himself. The infinite Hashem is called the emanator, the emanator. Then there's everything that is an emanation that comes below it. The low external level of Keser is the source of emanation, whereas the internal level of Keser is the emanator, it's himself, God himself at his very essence. I want to again just remind you here that we're talking about the spiritual, mystical dimensions. But really what they are talking about is how we relate to a deeper and deeper level of the truth of Hashem. Okay? To a deeper and deeper level of the truth of Hashem. So there's a certain point at which Hashem brought about the world and gave us these rules and things we have to keep, and that's very true at a very real level of connection. But there are levels that go much deeper than that. Where we end up, eventually, we'll see in this discourse where we're driving towards is to where we are bound up in the very essence of Hashem, in the very essence of God himself. Okay. So now let's take a look. So the Tzemach Tzedek adds that within the pleasure that stems from the lowest dimension of the source of all of emanation, there are also several levels. And here, we're going to go into a little Jewish history. There's the aspect of pleasure drawn down through the sounding of the shofar in the first Beis HaMikdash. We're again talking about blowing the shofar on Shabbat, which was only done in the Beis HaMikdash. Was that done in the first Beis HaMikdash or also in the second Beis HaMikdash? Anybody? It was done in both. But the Tzemach Tzedek is going to point out that in the first Beis HaMikdash, it was on a much higher level, because in the first Beis HaMikdash, they also blew the shofar on Yom Kippur. We're going to go do this all inside, but just to have an awareness of this. So nowadays, we blow the shofar. According to the Torah, we blow the shofar 2 days out of the year, right? And it's Rosh Hashanah. Both days are Rosh Hashanah. The first day and the second day. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they also blew it 2 days out of the year. Well, most years they just blew it 1 day. Rosh Hashanah was 1 day. But they blew it on another day. What was the other day that they blew the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash?
Matan Torah.
Was on Yom Kippur.
Oh, Yom Kippur.
Yovel year.
Only on Novel?
Only on Yovel, once every 50 years.
Yeah.
Blow the shofar on Yom Kippur. And they would blow just like we blow it on Rosh Hashanah. In fact, many of the rules and the laws of blowing a shofar, we learn out from the laws of blowing the shofar during the Yovel. The word Yovel is from the Aramaic word Yuvla, which means shofar. Okay? And Yovel of Yom Kippur, that every 50 years was a very, very special year. And so now the Rebbe is going to say that by the way, in the second Beis HaMikdash, you did not have Yovel. Because you only have Yovel when the majority of the Jewish people are living in the land of Israel according to their tribes. In the second Beis HaMikdash, the majority of the Jewish people were not living in Israel anymore. And even, in a short while, it could be that most of the Jews will be living in Israel. Well, certainly they'll have the majority, if not the plurality. There'll be more, I think maybe even right now, there are more Jews living in Israel than any other country, but you need the majority of the Jews living in Israel, and they have to be living according to the tribes, okay? In order for the laws of Yovel to apply. And that was only in the first base of Mikdash. So now let's go take a look. Any questions, comments? Yes.
Yeah, do I recall that they were also shofar blasts in the base of Mikdash like Erev Shabbos?
Yes, those were not Torah shofar blasts. So those were they weren't a rabbinic either. They were the practice in order to remind people when Shabbos was coming. And there were other times, according to the Torah, that you blow the shofar for other purposes and other reasons. But I'm talking about the
right.
associated with the liturgy according to the Torah, right?
Okay.
Yeah. The way that we blow it with the tekiah, shavarim, trua, tekiah, right? That sequence 3 times was only on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur of the Yovel year. So now, Chassidic adds that within the pleasure, there are several levels. So you have the aspect of pleasure drawn down, sounding the shofar in the first base of Mikdash. It surpassed the aspect of pleasure drawn down to the sounding of shofar in the second base of Mikdash. Okay, so number 1, first base of Mikdash, greater pleasure. Second base of Mikdash, lesser pleasure. Within the year of the first base of Mikdash itself, you had the sounding of the shofar in the Jubilee year, the Yovel, that was only observed during the time of the first base of Mikdash, surpasses the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So far we have 3 levels. The highest level being Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, the first base of Mikdash. Second being Rosh Hashanah in the base of Mikdash, and the third one being blowing shofar in the base of Mikdash during the second base of Mikdash. Nevertheless, even with regard to the shofar, Jubilee year of the Yovel, does it say a great shofar? No. It's just plain old shofar blast, trua, with katan. You shall blow the blast of the shofar. Okay, so it's just a shofar, not a great shofar. From this, we can conclude that the great shofar of the era of redemption will surpass even the revelation that was drawn down by the shofar of the Yovel year. So all of this is basically leading up to a question, not a question, but something that's that is yet left to be explained. So we have the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we're revealing a divine pleasure. At the time of the Beis Hamikdash, a higher level of pleasure, divine delight, right? When we say pleasure here, really, if you think about nachas, right? Let me give you an example. Who here likes, pie? If you like eating a pie, you get a pleasure from eating a pie. Imagine whatever food it is, right? And you put some whipped cream on the pie and it's perfectly made, delicious. You get such a pleasure. You put it into your mouth. You say a bracha first, of course. And we call it divine, right? Funny. Now, then you can have nachas from something that your child or your grandchild does. They do some beautiful mitzvah in the most amazing way, and you feel that nachas, right? Can you compare one to the other? They're not even in the same ballpark, right? They're not even on the same scale. They're in totally different scales. So when we're talking about different levels of pleasure, we can understand, right? You could have listening to amazing music, or you could have the nachas of being with your family. You could have the nachas of listening to a beautiful drush, a beautiful, right? There's so many different levels of pleasure, even on the physical level. And the divine spiritual level, we're talking about going deeper and deeper within who you really are. Would you say that enjoying the apple pie is like revealing a deep element of yourself? Or probably not. I hope not. Right? Nachas from your children, that starts to reveal part of who you are. When you have nachas, right, of being together with Jewish people, that's a deeper nachas that goes to the depth of who you are. So I just want to explain here that when we're talking about deeper nachas with Hashem as well, we're talking about developing a deeper and deeper, more essential relationship with God. David, please.
Is there any connection between the relationship between the first and second Beis Hamikdash and the first and second tablets?
I don't think so. I mean, not that I know of. It's really what I should say. I don't think so. I mean, in a sense, the second tablets, our rabbis say that the second tablets had even a superiority over the first tablets in certain ways. Whereas the second Beis Hamikdash had no superiority. Well, it did actually. It was longer. It was 420 years as opposed to 410 years. But I don't know of any such connection. So now back to our mimer. So we have, this is what I was bringing across here. This is what the Rebbe is bringing across here. We have the different levels of Tainug. We have the Tainug. When we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, is that revealing or connecting us with a divine level or arousing a divine level of pleasure? Yes, it is. That's one level. The Beis Hamikdash, a higher level. In the first Beis Hamikdash, yet a higher level. And in the Yovel year, in the first Beis Hamikdash, yet a higher level. But even that highest level of Tainug in the Beis Hamikdash, what did it not say? Shofar Gadol. So in other words, this Shofar Gadol that we're talking about in Sefer Yeshayahu over here, that Bayomahu Yitaka b'Shofar Gadol, that on that day a great shofar will be blasted. We have to be talking about a quantum divine pleasure, that there is a quantum leap beyond anything we've been talking about until now. And there are some levels of ta'anug, of delight, that were very high levels, but nevertheless, none of them warrant the title, the descriptor of Gadol, Shofar Gadol. But now we have Shofar Gadol. But now we're going to throw in one more shofar. You ready? That is the shofar of Matan Torah. Let's hear about the shofar of Matan Torah in Ois Gimel, section 3. So it's possible to extend the above concept further, explaining that the great shofar of the era of the redemption will surpass even the shofar sounded at the giving of the Torah. With regard to the giving of the Torah, it's written, and the sounding of the shofar. So there was a sounding of the shofar. The sounding of the shofar proceeded and became very strong. It is the sounding that was very strong, producing a great voice, but the shofar itself that produced the voice is not called a great shofar. So you do have an element of greatness by Matan Torah, because it says, "Vayhi kol hashofar holech v'chazek ma'od," that it was strength, gathered greater strength. But that was the kol shofar, the sound of the shofar, but not regarding the shofar itself. But the shofar itself is not called a great shofar. Thus, we can conclude that the great shofar of the era of redemption will surpass even the sounding of the shofar at Matan Torah. Are these two shofarot related? Well, we'll see soon from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer that Actually, yes, a brother and a sister. This concept is also reflected in the statement of Pirkei Rabbi Lazar, which relate that from the left horn of the ram used for the sacrifice at the Akedah was made the shofar sounded at the giving of the Torah, as indicated by the verse of the sounding of shofar, kol ha-shofar. By Matan Torah, it didn't say kol shofar, the sounding of a shofar. It said kol ha-shofar. That's called the definite article, the hey hayidiyah. What does that mean? That means we're talking about a very specific shofar. Which specific shofar was this? It was the shofar from the ram that Abraham had offered instead of at the Akedah, right? That really symbolized the Akedah. But that was the left horn. But the right horn, the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it continues, which is greater than the left horn, will be used for the sounding of the shofar in the time, in the era of redemption. And how do we know that? Because it says that on that day, a great shofar will be sounded. That's the verse of our very own mimer here, right? Bayom hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol. What's greater, the right side or the left side? The right side. Is it connected with Gedula? Yeah, the right side is connected with Gedula because we say Lecha Hashem, to you Hashem is Hagedula, which is the right side. And then Hagevura, the might. The greatness and the might. The might is the left side, the Gedula. And first is Gedula. So the word Gedula, and we say it every day in davening. Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, the Hano. That's referring to the right side, the left side, the center. Abraham, Yitzchok, and Yaakov. So is the right side connected with Gadol? It sure is. And that's why it says, Yitaka b'shofar Gadol. So now we know which shofar we're talking about. We're talking about the right shofar of the ram, of Abraham's ram. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. The reason why the shofar associated with giving of the Torah is not described with any modifiers, while the shofar of the redemption is called a great shofar, is explained by the Mittler Rebbe.
We only heard the Mittler Rebbe. After that, we didn't hear anything.
He's frozen.
Yeah, I'm trying to tell him.
I'm the host now.
Okay, stop eating and say something.
Uh-oh.
The Mittler Rebbe took the breath out of Rabbi Israel.
I saw a very interesting thing. Oh, here he is. He's back. Rabbi, we lost you.
I don't see him, so I don't know.
There, how about now?
Yeah. Excuse me, we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
We hear
Yes.
you, but I don't see you.
You don't see me. Let me make sure my video is on.
I see the screen that you're sharing.
Okay, that's the main thing. And
Now I
Yes.
see you.
there I am. Okay. So the Mittler Rebbe explains that at the giving of the Torah were the Jewish people all close by. Yeah, physically, they were all at the mountain. So you don't need a great shofar. Whereas we're calling the people who were lost in Assyria and were forsaken in Egypt. So for that, you need a great shofar. Let's see it inside. So we said at the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people were close. Even before sounding the shofar, so even sounding an ordinary shofar was sufficient to arouse them. The sounding of the shofar in the era of redemption, by contrast, is intended to arouse even those who are lost and those who are banished. So to arouse such people that are far away, a great shofar is necessary. On this basis, we can understand why the verse states that a shofar will be sounded, as opposed to saying that Hashem will sound the shofar. It's in the passive language. It shall be sounded, and the form of conjugation used, placing a kamas under yitaka, implies the shofar will be sounded of its own accord for the revelation that will stir those who are lost and those who are banished will come on God's own initiative without an awakening from below at all. That is, without being anticipated by any divine service on behalf of the Jewish people. Okay? So that's an interesting insight. So in other words, normally the nature of our relationship with Hashem is Ani l'dodi, I do something for Hashem. I show my love to God, and then God reciprocates by showing his love to me. And I feel the presence of God in some small way. And that is to a large degree in our service, we are meant to do something, right? If you want to feel something, do something. However, there are people who are so far away that they are not at a point of feeling anything. And thus it says the shofar will be sounded. It's not coming from anything that they have done on their own. Hashem himself is sounding the shofar to connect these people who did not make the first move. Okay. So now we're going to move on to Ois Dalet, section 4. In the beginning of the Mimer, and God willing, next week we'll go through a review of these different sections, these different areas. In the beginning of the Mimer Likutei Torah, after explaining the implication of the verse, and will be on that day the great shofar will be sounded, focus is placed on the phrase from the Rosh Hashanah liturgy. So now we'll talk about a new thing, a new idea. And we're going to connect it with everything here. But we say, when we blow the shofar, we say, during the repetition of the Amidah, we say, Zeh hayom techilat ma'asecha, zikaron liyom rishon. This day is the beginning of your acts, remembrance of the first day. The phrase indicates that every Rosh Hashanah represents a renewal of the world's existence. Because it's the beginning of your acts. Just like on your first day, you brought about the world. So now, this day, today is the beginning. You're doing that again. So it's a renewal of the world's existence, a parallel to the initial creation. Nevertheless, it states a remembrance of the first day, reflecting how Rosh Hashanah is merely a remembrance of the first day of creation. For at the beginning of creation, God's desire and pleasure with regard to the world was drawn down on his own initiative.
Rabbi,
Yes.
your sharing of the screen went away.
All of these technical difficulties that it means. So what's the difference? At the beginning of creation, God's desire for pleasure with regard to the world was drawn down on his own accord. At present, arousing his desire and pleasure is dependent on arousal from below. Okay, let me explain in regular English. Again, a similar concept that we were just talking about. There is the idea of the work that we do, and then God reciprocates with what he does. With the creation of the world, every year, so Rosh Hashanah, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be praying to Hashem to recreate the world. Does the recreation of the world depend upon our prayers and our service and our blowing of the shofar? Well, Judaism says, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Through our work and through our blowing of the shofar, Hashem says, yes, let's do it again. Let's bring about the universe once again in all of its glory. The very first time that Hashem created existence, did it depend upon our work? The answer is no. And thus it's brought in Kabbalistic writings, Olam Chesed Yiboneh, that the world was created with chesed, simply out of divine benevolence. We had done nothing to deserve it because we didn't exist. Right? So there's this idea of something coming directly from Hashem without our doing anything. And then there's the idea of the reciprocal relationship where we do something and Hashem reciprocates with a light. So we talk about Hashem recreating the world on Rosh Hashanah. And in a sense, it is a total recreation, but in another sense, it's not exactly like it was originally, because originally it did not depend upon our work at all. It was totally through Hashem. Let's take a look at this inside. So in the beginning, it was drawn down on his own initiative, right? We say because Hashem is chafetz chesed, he desires kindness, meaning that we didn't do anything. Hashem did it of his own. At present, nowadays, dependent on an arousal from below, right? That we bring about through our divine service. So these are the two. This is the dichotomy here. Either it being directly from Hashem without our work, or is it coming from Hashem through our work? Well, we're getting to a point here. Hopefully we'll get to the conclusion before the end of the class. Okay. The Maimarim cited above continue to explain that the divine service, which brings about the arousal from below, which draws down God's desire and pleasure in the creation of the world. Again, the divine service, right? Our work, when we're talking about divine service, that's the work that we do, which brings about, right, the arousal from below, that we are aroused to serve Hashem. And that draws down God's desire. Again, we're talking here about the reciprocal relationship, is reflected in the sages of our statement, the statement from our sages. Anybody want to guess what that statement is? Recite before me on Rosh. This is what our sages say. Recite before me on Rosh Hashanah the verses of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. Okay, so this is from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And it's a very interesting statement. Okay. Let's take a look. This is fine. Okay. This is what it says in the Gemara. Imru lefanai malchios. I want you to, okay, sorry, before we do this, I should explain. Has anybody here ever been to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah?
Yeah.
Yes, Baruch Hashem, me too. Which is the longest service?
It's all day.
the whole day. But you have different parts. You have Shacharis, you have Kriyas Torah, you have Tkiyas Shofar, you have Musaf. Musaf is by far the longest service. Why? So do you know that the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah is actually just its setup? It's the longest Musaf of the year.
More than Shabbat.
Much more. In fact, the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah has got 9 brachos. How many blessings on Shabbos?
3.
Shemona Esrei has got 7. 3 before, 3 after, and 1 in the middle. Right? On Shabbos, 7. On Sukkot, 7. On Pesach, 7. On Yom Kippur, 7. Every single festive Shemona Esrei only has 7 blessings. You have 3 at the beginning, 3 at the end, like every Shemona Esrei, and then the middle blessing. There's one exception to this. That one exception is Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. So on Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, we have an interesting thing. We have 3 blessings in the middle, and they are called Malchios, which extol God being the king. And we say verses about God being the king. Then, and it finishes off, Baruch atah Hashem, Melech al kol haaretz. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who's Melech al kol haaretz, who sanctifies Mekadesh Amo Yisrael v'yom hazikaron, something like that. Okay. So that's Malchios. Then we have another bracha of Zichronos, where we want God to remember us for the good. And then we have a third bracha, which talks all about the shofar. And then we concluded saying, blessed are you, Lord, who listens to the sound of the shofar of the Jewish people, barachamim, mercifully. Okay. So you've got 3 blessings in the middle, unlike any other festive Shemona Esrei. Where does this come from? This comes from a statement in the Gemara. So we are meant to talk about God being the king, about how God is to remember us, and about the shofar. Let's see how, in the words of our sages, recite before me on Rosh Hashanah the verses of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. Why? Malchios, so that you will make me king over you. Zichronos, so that the remembrance of you will arise before me for good. And how will this be accomplished? B'shofar. And uvameh, how is that done? B'shofar, through the shofar. Meaning that through our work of talking about God being the king, God becomes the king, right? Let's just keep it short to the point that we're talking about. Is Hashem the king, or do we make Hashem the king? Well, we see here, say these verses so that you will make me king over you. So how has God become the king? Because we recite these verses. How does God remember us? Because we recite these verses, and it's done through the shofar. Okay, let's see where the Rebbe goes with this. We'll do one more paragraph. It's getting a little bit complicated, but we'll bring it back around soon, next time. The reason why at present the influence must be drawn down by man's divine service, meaning that we have to recite these verses in order for God to become the king, is that at present all godly influences have to be drawn down by the divine service of the Jewish people. For Jews are rooted in God's very essence. Thus, the desire and pleasure which they draw down at present is greater than the desire and pleasure drawn down on God's initiative at the beginning of creation. Wow, this is quite an amazing idea here. We're going to come back to this next week because it's already 1 o'clock. And this is a big...
1 o'clock, it's already 3 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
Okay, see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.